Welcome everyone to our board-to-board interview series. Today we are with my great friend, Carpenter, Chief Marketing Officer of VMware, and we're glad to have you here today. My name is David Jang, Chairman of Monty Jade West. As a reminder, this video will be recorded today. If you have any questions, please utilize it in the Q&A function in Zoom. If you have any questions in general chat, please use the chat function, and please toggle to gallery view for your best experience. Monty Jade was founded in 1989 by immigrants from Asia. They bonded together to support one another because they were under-networked and under-resourced. Through this community, billions of dollars of enterprise value was created and hundreds of companies were formed. Even to this day, Monty Jade is focused on building community. We do this today under 3 pillars. First pillar is our interview series, which is focused on celebrating notable community leaders such as Carol through the understanding of their personal journey and how they overcame some of their many challenges. This focus on journey helps us better connect to great leaders to help inspire the next generation of leaders. The second pillar is focused on technology forums, in which we bring forward to our community new ideas to understand. This allows our community members to better understand opportunities for investment, careers, or just general knowledge. Recently, we've held talks on venture capital, AI, biosciences, and communications. Soon, we will be having some on robotics and human-machine interaction. Our last but most important pillar is our mentorship program. Our mentorship program is a 6-month-long, 100% volunteer-run program that's focused on helping build the skill sets of future leaders. Eastern Asians are underrepresented in leadership in many Bay Area technology companies. And today, Asians continue to lag their peers in being promoted. White males are promoted at 2 times the rate of Asian males, while white females are promoted at 3 times the rate of Asian females. The disparity has gotten worse over the last 20 years, and our mentorship program strives to address this inequality. This program focuses on deep engagements with a small mentor family to help address some of these challenges. We have just started our program for this year, and if you know anyone who's interested, please send them to our website. At this time, we would like to thank our virtual series sponsors, Deloitte Venture Pact Law, UMC, Silicon Motion, New York Life, and Most. It is with their continued support that we can run great programs like this. We'd also like to make a note to our annual sponsors for when we can actually visit and partake in person. These annual sponsors provide the funding for us to run physical events. Thank you all for joining us today. This is a very special day. We have Carol Carpenter here with us. She was a former chairman for Monty Jade as well. So predecessor of mine, I'm very glad to have followed in her footsteps. Carol started off first, graduating from Stanford, got her MBA at Harvard, has done a bunch of different roles. Started off as a product manager in Apple, later went on to Trend Micro, ran a bunch of different roles there, including ending up at a GM of their consumer and small business division. She later went on to ClearSlide as CMO. I think that's when we met, Carol. I think that's about the time range.
That's about it.
She then took over as CEO of a startup company, ElasticBox, found a great way to exit for them to CenturyLink. Later on ran as a VP of product strategy for CenturyLink. And then found her way to Google Cloud, which I'm going to have a bunch of questions for you on later on, and then ultimately making her way to the CMO of VMware. So today, as we do this fireside chat, I know Carol, it does have a hard stop at 6 o'clock because she is pretty busy today. So I want to be conscious of her time. And because we're a little bit more compressed, I'm going to do a shortened version of our fireside chat series, but I want to make sure that everyone here in the audience has an opportunity to do Q&A. We have Hao Ren here today, who will help with the Q&A moderation. So if you have any questions or anything, please put them in chat. And then Hao Ren will help prioritize some of the questions as we aggregate them. So again, this event is for the mentorship program. And Carol, welcome. Nice to have you back on our program again. How have you been?
Thanks, David. I'm good. I'm healthy, and family is good so far. I hope everyone else is safe and healthy.
Yeah. It's been very weird this entire year running operations and just running everything off of Zoom. But I'm hoping to be able to, eventually grab a drink with you physically in person sometime. You and
That'd
Phil.
be nice. And thank you everyone for taking time. I know you're all very busy as well, and I'm sure getting on one more Zoom is not at the very top of your list. So thank you for taking the time.
So I want to start off by asking, when you first started off, you were at Stanford, you had your, approach or getting your degree in economics. Did you have any idea what path you were actually going to take? Like, what was your vision at that time when you were still in school?
I think anyone who says they have a perfect vision is deceiving themselves and everyone else. I mean, just as you were walking through my background, I think it's pretty clear. I did not follow a linear path by any means. And actually, you didn't even, it's not even on my resume or anywhere. But coming out of undergrad, I actually worked at an investment bank for 2 years. Let's talk about crazy. And I didn't even know what investment banking was. Like, now we have the internet, we have all this information, probably information overload. But I did not know. I didn't know what it meant to be an engineer, frankly. I didn't know what any of these companies could do or would do. And I worked. So I was at Stanford. My family was probably middle class, lower middle class, actually. My father was a college professor, so we did not have a lot of money, and my mother didn't work. And I grew up in West Virginia. So when I went to Stanford, it was very eye-opening. But I worked throughout college. Probably many of you did as well. And I worked at the Career Planning and Placement Center. Okay. And it just so happened, like, this is how it went down, is at that time, Solomon Brothers, they're an investment bank, they're now a part of Citi. And there were recruiters from Solomon Brothers who came in. And it's like, oh, you're an econ major. Oh, you like math. Oh, you're good with numbers. Why don't you talk to the recruiter? And so I just ended up I didn't even really apply. And so I ended up talking to the recruiter. And so that's how I ended up in investment banking. But like, obviously I'm not ending up my career there. I hated it. I was not a good fit because what you do, and some of you may know, is you're an analyst. You sit in a little cubicle and you at that time is Lotus and Excel. You do Excel 9, 10, 12 hours, 13 hours a day. You do modeling, right? You're looking at what it would cost for a secondary offering. What would an acquisition, how would the P&Ls come, the balance sheets and consolidated, income statement look like? Like, that's what you do all day long. And I'm much more people oriented than that. It just was not a good fit. So for me, like many people, and especially right now, I know a lot of younger people are thinking about, hey, I'm going to go back to graduate school because, the economy is not so great. So for me, going back to B school was, a good way to pivot and discover new careers.
And is that how you pivoted eventually to the Apple role? Is that was the MBA the driver to make that switch, or how did you make that switch over?
Well, what happened was in business school, so two things. The one good thing about working at Solomon Brothers on all these, I was in the West Coast office, so SF, San Francisco. All the banking customers were tech companies. And to be honest, I was not good at I was not, like, I had no accounting training. Couldn't really read a balance sheet. Like, they throw you into these jobs with very little training. But I spent a lot of time. So, Seagate, which is a hard disk drive company, Pyramid Technology, they don't even exist anymore. Intel, like, these were the early titans in Silicon Valley, because this was in the early 90s. I would sit there and read the 10K from front to back, and I was more interested in, oh, this is really interesting. Look what they're doing with these chips, and gosh, they're going into gaming, and what could you do? Like, I was more interested in the tech than in the numbers. So anyway, when I was in business school, I ended up founding and being part of the high tech club, which was like 10 of us. I mean, this was in the mid 90s, and everybody still wanted to do consulting, banking, etc. Anyway, we're in this high tech club. The only people coming to campus are Microsoft, Intel, and Microsoft was still a giant then. And Apple was going to send one person for like a half day. And I was like, oh my gosh, I have to get on that interview schedule. And anyway, so I ended up talking to all three. I worked for Microsoft one summer, and Apple has they had a luster even in 1994 that they still have. So anyway, that's how it ended up. And no, none of it's planned. I Most of my career moves have been to follow people. I do what I'm sure all of you do for every job opportunity. I make a spreadsheet, the pros, the cons, the weighting. But at the end of the day, I'm like, I want to work for Eva Chen. She's a woman CEO of a technology company. Gosh, I'd like to work at Google Cloud because Diane Green, woman leader. So I followed people.
That's fantastic. So, like as you migrated from like Apple to your role at then like eventually Trend Micro, how did you select Trend Micro? I mean, was there also a female leader there that you were following? Like, what was that drive there?
Yeah. So interesting. So, talk about time machine. It was 2006. Okay. You guys were probably born around then. 2006, I had an offer from Google and an offer from Trend Micro. Okay. Now I know you all are sitting there thinking, why did you go to Google? You wouldn't be working right now, Carol. True. But I was so enamored because, my parents are immigrants. They came from Taiwan and China. And I was just so enamored by the idea of working for an international company. And not just an international company, because almost every company is international of substantive size. I wanted to work for a company that had really strong Asian roots. And the majority of the development for Trend Micro is actually done in Taiwan and in China. And the company trades on the Nikkei. So the CFO sits in Tokyo. So I was really enamored with that. And I had, all these visions, like I'm going to learn to write Chinese, not just speak it poorly. I'm going to learn to speak it better and I'm going to learn to write it. So that was the appeal. And Eva Chen was and is the CEO of Trend Micro. And I just had it in my head, like I would love to work for her and see what a strong woman leader is like.
And so after 5-6 years over there, how is your Chinese? 中文怎么样? And how is?
Wow, I mean, it's terrible. Yeah, it got better. Actually, there were times I was pretty good. I had a development team. Okay, me marketing. I had a development team when I was general manager. I was there for 6.5 years, and I lost 3.5. I was general manager of the SMB and consumer business, and so I had a development team. I had engineering, finance, marketing, product marketing, sales. I mean, it was really a true GMO. It was really for me it was a high growth period for me personally and professionally. And I had a mobile development team in Nanjing. I had my core development team in Taipei. And I actually, when I was in the moment, I did okay.
Language is one of those funny things. Like once you're immersed in it, it just comes so much easier. But once you step out of that, it's just so much harder. I remember when I was living in Hong Kong, it was the same thing. I could pick up Cantonese. Like I was picking up 80% of Cantonese at that time. But now like you speak Cantonese to me and I'm like, I have no idea what you're saying.
So true. It's so true. I mean, I'll tell you one thing I really did enjoy was now everybody is remote and, we're all doing distributed work. I think Trend was ahead of the trend in that the CEO was in Pasadena, the CFO was in Tokyo, the CTO, a gentleman named Ryman Guinness, was in Munich. So we worked virtually, and people would say like, wow, how'd you have an international job? Because my kids were fairly young still. And actually I had more flexibility because everybody was wherever they were, it was really interesting.
That's great. So ultimately you made a transition from like, corporate GM, CMO roles to a startup. Like, I mean, you're talking about significantly smaller. Why that big leap? What was it, something that was in you that you're like, I want to do something cool, something new? Like what made you make that leap?
Okay, I blame Reid Hoffman. So Reid Hoffman and I, went to college together. And Reid Hoffman, obviously, he was founder of LinkedIn, and he's and I wouldn't say we're good friends, but we're friends. And we used to be much closer at a certain time. But anyway, we're still friends. We had breakfast. I still remember we met at Hobie's in Town and Country in Palo Alto, which is not there anymore. And he said to me, okay, you've been at Trend over 6 years. And he said, how are you contributing? And I said, what are you talking about? I work my ass off. I work my butt off. I'm contributing like every day. I'm working really hard. I'm contributing to the economy, to jobs. I've got teams all over the world. We're opening up new channels in Europe. And he goes, no. He goes, why do you live in Silicon Valley and you're not participating and contributing to the innovation that is here? He's like, you could do what you're doing and live in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, anywhere. And I got to tell you, that was probably a year before I left Trend. So it just like stuck in my head, and that was 2012. For those of you who have lived in this area since 2012, startups were booming. And many of those startups are now the big companies. And he's like, okay, you didn't go to Google in 2006. He's like, come on, you've got to participate. Anyway, so that stuck in my head. And here's the crazy thing. And if I could tell my younger self this, I would have said, have a little more confidence. Because I had it in my head, because at that point, 2012, I had not been in a startup for 10 years. I had been part of 2 startups, which were both bought. One went public and after Apple, one went public and was then merged with another company. And the other one was bought by Keynote. Anyway, and I was like, so I had not been in a startup in 10 years. So I was getting calls, and I'm sure you all get calls. As the general manager, I was getting phone calls like, hey, Carol, we're looking at president roles, small companies, because I was running a $600 million P&L. And I did not have the confidence. I thought they were crazy. I'm like, well, I haven't been CEO or president of anything in like a startup in 10 years. So I had it in my head that I needed to do a startup. So I did this startup called ClearSlide, which later got bought later, but it was very typical. Rising star, went from 10 million of ARR to 40 million of ARR in 2 years. Me and the head of sales went and complained to the board about the CEO, which the board, to their credit, they did something. They brought a COO in to eventually take the CEO role. And the COO, 1 month later, let the head of sales and me go. So I was like, oh my gosh, after 6.5 years at Trend, I only lasted 2 years here. And we were on this rocket ship. So anyway, of course, I was like, that's not good. And that's when a good friend of mine said to me, because I'm like, yeah, I'm going to look for another CMO role. And she's like, are you crazy? Are you crazy? She's like, instead of complaining about all the other jerk CEOs that are out there in startups, why don't you go be one? And I was like, no, I still have this insecurity that like, I can't be a CEO. I've never been a CEO before. And then she challenged me. This actually, it was my friend Mark Ingerante, who was at Salesforce. He said, Carol, when do you really need a new job? I said, I don't know, maybe 6 months, a year. I don't know. I guess I don't really need one. She said, just set a time frame. He said, set a time frame. If it's 3 months, 6 months, tell everybody who calls you, this is the kind of job I want. And if you don't have that job, you don't get the CEO job in that time frame, then yeah, go back and look at CMO roles. You guys should all try this. So then here's what I did. Everybody who called me, hi, I've got a CMO role, we're doing search, blah, blah, blah. I'd say, well, actually, I'm looking for a CEO role, and here's the type of company I'm looking for. And it's amazing. Like, I follow these exec recruiters and friends, and people would say, you're not qualified. You've never been a CEO. Why you? You can't do that. Not one. David, they all immediately were like, oh, well, I've got a search going on over here for this. I have a search. So it was just like this. It was incredible. Like, if you just say that you want and can do it, it just happens. Anyway, long story short, the reason how I ended up as CEO of ElasticBox was because a friend of mine, see, this is me and how much I put faith in people. He's a VC at Battery Ventures, and Dharmesh, who used to work for me, interestingly, Dharmesh is like, Carol, he's like, of course you should be a CEO. I'm like, you're totally qualified. And he's like, I have the company for you. That's how it happened.
That's amazing. So what did you learn as a startup CEO, venture-backed startup CEO? How did you manage that transition going from a CMO to a CEO? Talk to us about that.
Oh my gosh, David. I mean, you could chime in here too. I think there were two bits of advice I got from the very beginning. One was from a friend who was a first-time CEO, and he said, "Get your kitchen cabinet." And I did this. I did this when I went to Google. I did this as coming into VMware. Get your kitchen cabinet. Like, find 3 to 5 people who are in the same kind of boat and role, who are not your boss, are not your board, because your board hires and fires you, and aren't your friends, because your friends will get tired of hearing about your startup after like day 3. So I did that. I had 3 people who were first-time CEOs, and they were my kitchen cabinet to whom I went. And then the other big piece of advice, which is, okay, when you're a CMO, and even when I was GM, I think this is probably true if I look back and if I'm intellectually honest, a lot of what you're doing is managing your stakeholders, and you say yes to a lot of people. You're in service too, okay? When you're CEO, and David, you know this, you're not in service to anyone. And the best piece of advice was always start with no. That you want others to justify, and you're going to make some really hard trade-offs. You have to start with no. So I'll tell you the hard part about that is, so, okay, 2 years later, we sell the market. It was clear the product market fit was not great. I could tell you all about learning that hard lesson. We sold. And then, I ended up at Google Cloud, which I can tell you that's a really interesting story too. And they give you, when you come in as a VP or as an exec at Google, they give you a coach. 3 months in, the coach, super guy, David Peterson, comes to me. He's like, hey, I'm hearing really good things about you. You're making really good progress. You fit in culturally, except there's one thing. You say no too much. Because Google is like a lot of big companies. For any of you who are there, it's a yes and culture. You never say no. And by the way, Trend Micro, which is a very Asian company in terms of culture, is a yes and company, right? Like nobody says that. Very passive aggressive, yes and. So anyway, that was a change for me, both going and coming and going.
So I love your how you got into Google story. If you could actually tell the rest of us how you got in, like I always found that fascinating, and it really speaks quite a bit about you as an individual. So your story.
Okay, well, so I sold ElasticBox, traveled the world. In fact, we were closing the deal, and my daughter and I were on a mission trip on the Amazon with my very best friend from college, who's a doctor, and anyway, we were closing it. I still remember like not having good internet and like trying to talk to the banker. So then I went to CenturyLink, and I was never meant to be there a long time. CenturyLink is a telco based out of the Southeast. They just actually rebranded to Lumen. They're doing some interesting things now. But, it was always supposed to be a transition, get the team settled. And the CEO there was very gracious. He's like, if you want to stay, it'd be great. We need more cloud-oriented people. But culturally, it was not a great fit. So, and by the way, a lot of my team is still there. It's quite stunning. Like, and what they do, this cloud management platform is quite strategic. So anyway, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do, and kind of talking to some people, and I thought I was going to do another CEO startup role, actually, because you kind of get these things in your head, like, yeah, I think I want to do it again. But I will say, and David, you probably know this, like the emotional stress of worrying about everybody in the company. I tell people, like, I sat there at the holiday party, and instead of enjoying myself, I just looked around at families and people, and I felt so much burden, like I have to make sure we succeed. So anyway, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And again, another friend, you got to have good friends who poke and prod you, said, well, okay, you really like this cloud space. Where would you want to work? And I said, well, the only two big clouds, and this was at the time, I said that I really think are interesting are AWS or Google Cloud. AWS Seattle based, and this is when everybody went to the office, right? And I'm like, well, the natural one is Google. And so I'm like, yeah, I'd really love to meet Diane Green. She's another strong woman leader. She founded VMware, blah, blah. And this one friend said, well, why don't you just send an email? I'm like, she wouldn't meet with me. Anyway, I sent a cold email to Diane Green. And I have to tell you, like, I really sweated it. And I consider myself a good marketer. So I'm like, I'm going to write the kind of email she's going to have to answer. And she did. And then I met her. And then the rest is history. I met the whole team. Yeah.
That's amazing. Like I'm always like, oh my goodness, that doesn't work, does it? And like it works. It totally works. We should all be sending emails, but we got to be strategic about it and like make sure that it hooks them in, right?
Yeah. Well, basically, here's the thing. I offered her an opinion. I said, look, after being around this cloud space for a few years, here's what I'm observing. Here's what I would recommend. And oh, by the way, if you have 15 minutes, I will swing by. I'll make it super easy for you. I will swing by and bring you a coffee.
That's amazing. I love that story. So now that you're at VMware, where you are head of VMware, massive virtualization company, what are your thoughts about the future now? Like now with your team, right? You got a bigger team, you got a bigger responsibility here now. Like what's your thoughts moving forward?
Yeah, so I was really attracted to VMware because we partnered with them at Google Cloud. And the other thing is, Google Cloud has grown tremendously. It was great. And I know David's wife has kind of hired her in. She's phenomenal. Really great growth. I mean, tremendous growth. You can look at all the public numbers that they've started to report. And it was a lot of fun. And the hard part, though, is even when we looked at the total available market and we looked at this, even if we won every single digital native, we would still be number 3. Okay. I mean, look what AWS and Azure are doing. I mean, distant number 3. And even then, if you look at Alibaba's numbers, kind of questionable. And so it became really clear we needed to have an offering that would meet customers where they are, the on-premise world. And that's how I started running more and more into VMware. And where I also realized that as much as Google Cloud, we needed to go towards the on-premise piece, that VMware was coming to the cloud piece. So it was so interesting. They pinged me probably a few years ago, and I was like, no, I'm not that interested. You're old school. You're doing virtualization. That's passé. And but then last year, after they bought Pivotal, which is a Kubernetes-based development and orchestration engine, and then they bought Carbon Black, which is a security company, I thought, oh, this is really interesting. Like, I think strategically, there's a lot of good stuff they're doing. So anyway, they reached out to me this year. And at first I was like, nah. And then I realized, like, wow, what a unique strategic position where they actually are spanning, VMware spans both the on-premise and public cloud world. And actually they're partnering with all the cloud providers and they're partnering. So it's a real multi-cloud world, which, by the way, is what most enterprises, that's the state of the nation. It is a multi-cloud world. Not that they're running the same app on multiple clouds, but they're using different clouds for different purposes. So that's why I came. And I also came because the COO, Sanjay Poonen, is extremely persuasive and probably one of the best leaders I have ever worked for in my 25 years of working, which, says a lot, because let's face it, most leaders are kabuki dancers. They really are. Lots of dancing and pretending. And also there's a lot of, tops down command and control. And I gotta tell you, like I was just telling a friend, I talk to Sanjay at least once a week. Even when he's giving me feedback that's not positive, I come out of every discussion with him feeling more motivated, more engaged. Like, I hope you all have good managers like that, right? You feel like, gosh, I'll walk off a cliff for you. I'm going to go climb Mount Kilimanjaro for you. So anyway, it makes a huge difference. At Google, we always talked a lot about psychological safety is the number one kind of attribute of a team to get to high performance. So how do you create psychological safety? I'd say he doesn't say it. So yeah, so they sold me and I came in thinking I was going to do a renovation on the marketing team. Okay. Because this is a company that's going from on-premise licensed software to SaaS and subscription. And in our last public earnings report, we shared we're at 22% now for SaaS and subscription, and it's growing like 40% every quarter. So it's quite a transformation. I really wasn't aware of like the real state of the marketing team until I got here. And it's, it's really talented people, but a lot of the practices and motions are geared around enterprise selling in a more traditional way. So we're working on it as a team. We're SaaSifying things. We're driving a full customer life cycle. But I love it. I love it so far. A lot of customer exposure. Even though it's COVID, we do a lot of customer meetings over Zoom, and it's exciting.
It sounds really, really exciting. I'm really excited for you in this role. How does your cabinet look now? So I know like every time you go to a new spot, you try to like build out a cabinet. So what is the composition of this cabinet this time?
So it's other CMOs. So Karen Walker, who's the CMO over at Intel, Rachel Thornton, who's the VP of Marketing / CMO at AWS. So I'm just, and Anne over at Adobe. So more of the CMOs. I've actually been thinking about that, and I'm glad you raised it, that actually I would like to have some CROs, sales leaders in my cabinet. Because, marketing and sales, really to tighten up the relationship. And so much of what we do is integrated.
Definitely. So, like since Monty Jade is a, Asian affinity organization, I want to ask the question of, how has your ethnic background being Asian and as a female, like how has that impacted or hurt you? Or like what are some challenges that you faced with that background?
Yeah, it's so interesting because, for sure, growing up in West Virginia, there was a lot of discrimination. Coming out to the Bay Area for college, I didn't feel it so much. And I would say I've had more gender discrimination than I have had. Well, let me take that back. Lots of gender discrimination. Like when I was raising money for ElasticBox, I actually had a VC say to me, well, just wear a skirt and I'm sure you'll get the big check. Okay. Now, that was 2016, before a lot of the Me Too. So hopefully that's not happening as much anymore. But some of it's kind of insidious. Like it's the small microaggressions, right? Like being spoken over. I don't know if that happens to any of you. Are we in a cone of silence? I'll say, I even think like at Google, the whole performance management process, it's geared around an archetype, right? It's geared towards, like the people who rise very quickly are people who are assertive, who are fast thinkers, not slow thinkers. So it's the people who show up in the meeting, take up space, make themselves heard. And if you are a slower thinker, and I don't mean like you're slow, like you're not smart. I mean, just, we all have different processing speeds, or some of us like to think a little bit longer before we speak, which is actually a good thing, right? But if you're not first step to bat or quick to jump in, if you're not quick and pithy, and it can hurt your career. And I definitely felt that there. Like there's a bias towards, the people who are a little more assertive and aggressive. So anyway, and then I'd say the thing I see overall, just being in IT, and I don't know how many of you are, is, it's still very male dominated. Like, I watched these keynotes, even our own recently, and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's white male after white male, Indian male, white male, we have work to do. So something I'm trying to do, we did this at Google, I'm trying to do it at VMware, which is anytime we have a panel, anytime we have speakers, like really thinking and being purposeful about diversity and inclusion to set the example. For me, a lot of it was just, I didn't speak up enough. When I was younger, because I didn't know I needed to advocate for other women, for other Asians. But I would say the problem we have now is we are considered a successful minority. So we are invisible because of that, meaning there's so much focus and discussion, as there should be, about recruiting and retaining Blacks and Latinx. But I'm like, okay, we don't have very many Asians either. Like, so, and at Google, they don't consider Asians to be a minority. And at VMware, they don't either. So I'm fighting that. I'm not fighting it, meaning I just want to make sure everyone's included.
Definitely. Howard, you want to ask some questions?
Yeah, I got a really good one from Bing. So Carol, so within the last 5 months at VMware, what has been the number one highlight and the number one low light you can share?
Oh, okay. So I'd say the highlight is the people. I mean, it's always the people. Like Pat Gelsinger, the CEO, is extremely, he's a great leader, really good leader, level 5. And my team, it's the people you work with every day. And a lot of that's just, I just think that the people is where it's at, because for me, I've always worked, I've always had children, and I couldn't outwork everybody, which, by the way, I tried to do that when I was younger. And what I realized is I still couldn't outwork the outworker bees. So once you realize that, you're like, okay, how am I going to compete? Okay, I'm not going to outwork everybody. So I'm going to focus on hiring really great people who are better than I am, and process. Like, question the process so that then I can go home and have dinner. So the people in the process, that's been the people has been the highlight, and the process has been the low light. Just, it's a very decentralized company, and lots of silos of decision making. And so I've just been working with the team to build more integration and process, and not process like heavy process, like big company bureaucracy, but just, processes like, hey, when we think about a campaign, we're going to think about everything from the brand through the demand, through to the sales team, like all the way through. And I would say the other thing is, the other highlight has been, we just had VMworld, which was the largest virtual event we've ever put on. It was, I think we're at almost 200,000 registrants, and over 50% engaged. I mean, who knows? I mean, we're all learning how to do these virtual events. So I'm sure it'll all change next year when we're more hybrid, I think.
Fantastic. Howard?
So people and process. And Carol, definitely you're now leading a much bigger team, and how you created like a psychology safety for your team, and also the downline, and make them feel like they are safe in this current environment.
That's a really good question, and I probably have a little more work to do there. I try to model by example, right? So I'm very direct, I'm very transparent, I share information, I show probably more than I should, but I'm just oriented that way. Number 2, I expect my leadership to do the same and to be open and sharing. And then number 3 is I have office hours, they're 15, 20-minute chunks, and people can come in, skip level, they do it virtually. And I think just trying to show that, we're somewhat flat org, even though we're not, and give everybody access so that you treat everyone the same. Everyone's a person. I love it when people say, "Oh, you do B2B marketing." I'm like, no, we do human to human marketing. You know. So yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Carol. And this is a question from your stories on doing your startups. And when you work on the startup, do you choose your own partners or you work on your own? And why was that?
Oh, so in the case of, let's see, I've actually done 4 startups. Okay. The
Wow.
first one was, again, okay, I was at Apple after 3+ years, and then my husband's freshman year roommate had started a company. So this is the whole people thing. And, we're at dinner and Jeff's like, "Oh, you should come work with us." Okay. So that one, Tumbleweed, they went public. The second one was bought by Keynote Systems, a public company. So I actually didn't start it. So, I'm just going along for the ride. And I was junior. I think they gave me the title of VP of marketing, but like I had 3 people. I could have been VP of janitorial services. The third one was ClearSlide, the one that slid to nothing. And then the fourth is ElasticBox, where I was CEO and we sold it. And that one was also not me as the founder. I came in as CEO, the co-founder was still there as CTO. So I didn't quite have that choice, but I think, look, as CEO, like I thought really hard about this co-founder, like, okay, if I'm going to work with him, like, how are we going to work together? Like, you're going to spend a lot of time. There's a saying, adversity doesn't build character, it reveals character. And so, asking the questions and understanding, like for a partner in a startup, how do they deal when things don't go well? Because in a startup, most things don't go well. It never goes as planned. You never make your number. Things never work out the way you want them to. So like, how do they deal with adversity? And that was like all the questions I asked this guy, Alberto, who's still a good friend of mine. He's actually at Google Cloud. I brought him into Google Cloud too. And it's like, okay, Alberto, like, how do you deal with stress? What do you do when customers are unhappy? What do you do, when people aren't doing what you want them to do?
Thanks, Carol. For startup, that's definitely an exciting journey and what a great experience. So, good question here. I can tell this is from an experienced professional. So, when taking new opportunities, you also leave the resources and assets accumulated over the years behind. So, what's the aspect you will evaluate to convince yourself to make the move? It must be not easy, and how you think about that?
Yeah, I never, other than the people, I have not, and maybe I should have more, weighed the loss of the assets, but it's the people and it's so interesting because as in the last few years, as I have considered different changes, I've actually thought a lot about, well, if I went to company A versus company B, who could I take with me? Like the people I really like, which ones would come? And that has weighed more heavily in my decision. It's always been the people. Like the learning, you're going to take the learning with you. Now, we'll say this. There are times, has anybody watched Game of Thrones? When Jon Snow says, "My watch is over." Like I felt that at the end with Google Cloud. 3.5 years there was a new CEO coming in, and I was like, my watch is over. And now my watch is over. But there are other times, and ClearSlide's that example, where the COO came in and I was like, I'm not done. I am not done. And I did feel, so it was the people, but more so I felt like there were still things I wanted to do for the business. So yeah. And so I probably would not have left had not we brought in the COO who then brought in his own leadership. But I don't think about the assets so much because the assets in your brain and it's your relationships.
Wonderful.
I don't know. And the other thing here is, okay, this is the problem that Reid Hoffman, I blame him, is because he challenged me and said, oh, you need to participate, you have to contribute. I did feel like, what's the point of working for a large established company and living in Silicon Valley? Unless you can really have a big impact. And so that part, I do think like you have to ask yourself when you're thinking about doing something new, like if you're going to be in Silicon Valley, you should try to participate. But now you can, it doesn't matter. You can work from anywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. Participation and you're on take the right. Can you share a little bit of your perspectives on how you find the top performers in a new organization or like environment quickly to help you to achieve your objectives?
That is a great question, Mark. Thank you, Howard, for reading that one. I'd love your advice on this. You know, it's interesting, especially with COVID. So I joined VMware in June. I have not met most of these people in person, obviously over Zoom. So this when I took over ElasticBox, it was not doing so well. Okay, I mean, why would they take a first-time CEO? If it was doing great, the current CEO would have stayed there, of course. So it was interesting because probably don't remember. Meg Whitman was turning around HP at the time. Well, she never fully turned it around, okay, but she was trying to. So she was about 2 years into HP before it became HP and they split it. And I went to a breakfast through YPO, and there were supposed to be 80 people. Everybody bailed. It's California, everybody's flaky. And only 15 people showed up. And she was talking about her turnaround. And I remember this, and this is how I felt coming into VMware. She said, a third of the people are going to be super excited about whatever you say do, and they're going to jump on your bus immediately. A third of the people are going to say, I really liked the old leader. I was loyal, and I really don't want to be part of what you're doing, and I'm going to leave or move to another org or something. And then you have a third, and they're probably most of you, because I find that most of us, I don't know, as Asians, we're just a little more measured. We're not that rash. And a third are going to say, I'm going to wait and see. Okay. So when you go into a new org, you got to quickly figure out like who that third is, because they're sitting on the fence. And if you can't get them off the fence, they become poisonous, they undermine you, and they will be negative, and they will become this drag on. Actually, I really like the third who just are upfront and say, I don't want to be part of your org. Like, good. Like, shake hands, or don't shake hands, shake elbows, move on. But that third, and so what I tried to do is figure out very quickly on my leadership team first, who was in, who was out, and who wasn't, like put them in these categories in your head and figure out like who's really committed to the change I wanted to drive. And you realize that there are some people who are just going to be very cautious, and they're just going to be in the wait and see. And those are the people you actually have to directly say, hey, look, Howard, I really need you on my bus. I really need to know, like, are you going, like, you have to actually explicitly ask them to buy in and support. You can't wait and see. That's just what I've noticed. And so I always couch it as like, look, I really need your help. I need your help. Here's what I'm seeing. Here's the current environment. We have a big transformation ahead of us. I need your help. Do you have the bandwidth and the commitment to help me? So that's what I try to do.
Wonderful. Thanks, Carol. That's a great question, by the way, from Mark.
Yeah, Mark, that's a really good one. And then finding top perform. Can I just tell you this one thing? It's been hard because I have to take everybody's word for it. Like, oh yeah, XYZ is so great. Oh, he's super smart. She's really great. I've had a hard time figuring out throughout because like I think I have over 700 people. I don't know them all. I haven't seen them all, and like it's hard to tell. So I'm just relying upon my leadership, who I think has good, kind of good judgment.
Yeah. All right, Carol. So seems like career journey. There's a lot of transitions. Like it seems to be all kind of like a skill up. And so just when you transition to a new company, like can you share like what skill set from previous company or like a general approach do you find is the most effective, and how do you evaluate success at like a 3 months, 6 months, 1 year like time frame?
Yeah. So, I made a list of, and I need to find this doc. When I left ElasticBox, or when things were winding down, I made a list and I wrote a doc on what I learned as CEO.
Hmm.
And I think it's really important to do that retrospective on what you've learned before you move to the next thing. And also make the list of, this isn't so much skill sets, but kind of the retrospective, like, what do you want to do differently? And I'll be honest, like I realized for me, I am better at managing my peers and managing down, and not as good at managing up. It's just, I never valued it or thought it was important. It's kind of like, well, yeah, they'll see what, the whole thing, like, oh, they'll see what a good job I'm doing. I'm sure, other people will mention it, and I'm sure that it'll be recognized. It never happens. You need to make a plan and do it yourself. And so there were several things, but one of the things I said is I'm definitely going to spend more time managing up, not in a political way, but just making sure there's visibility and I have an open connection with key execs. The second thing is, because I was not the CMO at Google Cloud, there were lots of things that everyone complained about. I actually gathered the complaint list before I came to VMware as CMO, because I was like, if there's all these things I'm critical of, other people are critical of, what do I want to do differently to be better than that? So anyway, that's what I did as well. And then look, the success, like, of course you make your 100-day plan, your 200-day plan. I should actually check. My 100-day plan has been, I've passed it. I don't have, and I should actually create the next plan. I think about it a little bit differently, because when you're a leader of a large team or a large company or a large group, it's not so much about like the plan, and the plan matters still. And we're doing planning, so I'll have my 6-month and annual plan. It's more about, what do you really want to communicate, and how do you symbolically communicate it? And I just think that's the most important thing. Like I'll give you an example. I'm trying to remake our demand gen engine. Okay, because our demand gen engine has historically been more, again, focused towards large enterprise deals, and a lot of what we were doing was what I would call hospitality, high touch, personal, small events. But I want to improve our digital demand gen engine. And so, like, yeah, I could tweak it. There's lots going on, data pending and better reporting and better campaigns and better personalization. Do you think if I communicate that upwards or even downwards, anyone's going to remember it? Yeah. So I'll give you what I said to the team is like, let's take the most strategic product or solution and rewire the whole customer journey, from the website to the emails we send, to the way our BDRs, the way we train sit, like end to end. Because what I want to be able to say is like, look at this strategic initiative. So one of our strategic initiatives is VMware Cloud on AWS, which is growing like a rocket ship. And to be able to show how we can drive a digital journey as part of that. I mean, gosh, when I was at Google Cloud, we could close 100K deals over the phone. And so there's no reason VMware, we couldn't do the same thing. So anyway, just picking things that are going to communicate. So I'm trying to communicate, hey, we're fixing the digital demand gen engine. And if I went through like slide by slide about all the pieces, my peers, the team, everybody would be like, boring, boring, boring. But picking something that everybody cares about. Another example. So when I got to ElasticBox and I took over CEO, a lot of bad mojo, like a lot of bad feelings about the old CEO, about all the problems. And it became really clear to me that people could not move forward unless we got it out on the table. So I said, hey, everybody, this is ElasticBox 2.0. Had my kids help me. We took a cardboard box. We decorated it with the ElasticBox colors and I gave everybody little Post-it notes. And I said, I want you to write down everything you hated about ElasticBox 1.0. Like all your complaints and all the issues, which there were a lot. Throw them in this box. And then we went to the fire escape and we burned it in effigy. We set it on fire. This is in San Francisco. We went outside and we burned it. We said, okay, gone. We are not going to talk about that anymore. Like this is weighing us down like a boat anchor. We need to focus on what's next. That was my symbolic gesture. And we all have these. You've got to think about. And I have found like I could have held brown bags and asked me anything and had office hours and we could have spent years of all the complaints. I was just like, this is what we're doing.
Thank you, Carol. This is definitely not a 1 hour session, but I have to stop here. So we still have questions, but we know you will always have you back at certain times of the year. Thank you for joining us. And I will turn the mic back to David. Thanks again, Carol.
So Carol, I want to maybe give you kind of like some closing remarks. We've got a new class this year. We have 40 mentees, which was amazing in terms of recruiting in COVID. We were kind of concerned in terms of being able to expand, but we had a great team and a great, with Howard and some of the people on the call as well, with Ryan somewhere on the background as well, recruiting. Any kind of final words to wrap up? Like if you had any messages for the group?
I mean, what I said earlier, I said two things. One is, confidence in yourself. And, the fact that you all are participating in the mentorship program shows like incredible proactivity. So you probably already have more confidence than I had. And the second thing is, I didn't get to where I am without mentorship. So it kind of also ties into this, like sponsorship, mentorship, so critical for moving ahead and doing the things you want to do in your career. I wish you all great success, whatever you're doing now and whatever you want to do next. Thank you for having me, David.
Carol, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time. I know you're a busy person and you got a lot of stuff on your plate at this current time. So really appreciate you coming out and continuing to support Monty Jade. And I look forward to post-COVID so we can grab a glass of wine.
That'd be so great. Thank you. Okay,
Carol. As a reminder, our mentorship program has just launched. We ran our first workshop in October the 3rd. We would love to see you all out there as well if you're interested in our mentorship program. We are backed by some of these great companies. If you are interested, please go to our website at montyjade.org. We also have some great events coming down the line. We have another board-to-board interview series in the middle of November, one with Wen Shea, GP at Kleiner Perkins, and then another one on 11/21 with Li Guangyi, who's also managing director out at TransLink. We've got some other great events, so please check our website for the most recent updates. Look forward to seeing you at future events. Lastly, we'd like to thank our sponsors, Deloitte, Venture Pacific Law, UMC, Silicon Motion, New York Life, and Most. It's with their ongoing support that we're able to put on these great programs. We're looking forward to seeing you at future events, so please stop by. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.